I have a doubleheader hit for you this week on Cider Chat. First, we're going to be taking a little stroll into Jackson Ward, known as Black Wall Street in Richmond, Virginia. And then we'll be hearing from the keynote speaker at CiderCon, Diane Flint. Hey, apples, make them pop. Pop, 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 pop. Hey, my name is Rhea Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Hip, hip, hooray! One of the many cool things of producing Cider Chat and hosting this here podcast is I get to practice my pronunciation of both English words and foreign languages that I'm unfamiliar with. So let's try this word, which is a name of a company, and I'm going to kind of draw it out. It is Schrammel. And I guess if I was in Slovenia, I would be able to be really hip and just say Schrammel. It's spelled Sraml. And it is a family-owned company in Slovenia. And they are now sponsoring Cider Chat, which is super cool. I actually met one of the co-owners at CiderCon2022, so there will be an upcoming episode with Jan. But in the meanwhile, I am working with Dennis, who is really working the English language here. So I want to give him huge kudos for doing his English best, which it ain't easy, folks, if English is not your first language. So I just adore this, because this is what cider is. It is international. There are so many flavors and ways to approach it, and cultures and foods. Oh, just makes me go wild. So anyways, what's the company's name? Schrammel. Okay, Schrammel. I think I have it. And now we're going to roll with this little piece with Dennis and, try to find out why the name Schrammel pops up more and more inside the cider community.
At Schrammel, we are producing cutting-edge food processing machinery. We love to provide solutions that eases a cider maker's life. We actually have an in-house R&D team of engineers who day by day dissect the process of cider making and search where there is still room for improvement. Everything, from the fruit intake, washing over the fruit processing, all the way to automation of the bottling phase. Our aim is to help cider producers all over the world to realize their idea of how a cider should taste, feel, and look. This is one of the core ideas of Schrammel.
Dennis, what's the story behind Schrammel?
We actually have a really nice story. What do you get when a mechanical engineer who is passionate about winemaking needs a good wine press? It's actually about two brothers developing their idea of how machines for winemakers should work. Originating from Vipava Valley, a region marked by grapes and apples, we truly mastered the art of winemaking. We developed love and passion for the process, and for the last 30 years we continued to incorporating this idea into our machines. Meanwhile, we are in the second generation of management, and we expand our expertise to the world of cider making, juice production, and filling technology. And we are proud to serve customers all over the world.
I didn't know that podcasts were so popular in Slovenia.
We love Cider Chat.
Cool. Well, there you have it. Thanks, Dennis. And just so you know, once again, they are making cutting-edge fruit processing equipment. So you have the grinders for the apples, and you have the cider press. They have it all the way through, even canning lines. Find out more by going to their website, schrammel.com. That's spelled S-R-A-M-L. Once again, that's spelled S-R-A-M-L. Regular listeners of Cider Chat will know this next sponsor by name, and that is Fermentus. I'm just so delighted that they decided to come back on board with Cider Chat for the year 2022. So you'll be hearing me talking about Fermentus all year long. In fact, this is your first reminder of many that I'm going to be recording a full-length episode with the folks at Fermentus and answering questions that you may have about fermentation and the use of yeast. So if you have them, start sending them my way to info@ciderchat.com and just put up at the top there Fermentus. Remember, it's spelled Fermentis, Fermentus. And you can find out about them by going to fermentus.com. Because if you are working on balanced, sweet, fruity, or crisp cider, Fermentus is the obvious choice for beverage fermentation, now offering an expanding range of cider yeast. Fermentus has the right yeast for your favorite cider. Learn more about how Fermentus can improve the quality of your cider fermentation and for the latest on their exciting new product release by going to fermentus.com and sending me questions so I could ask them during that recording, which will be taking place somewhere around late spring. Check it out once again at fermentus.com. Up next is part 1 of our 2-part series on Keynote Speakers for me at CiderCon 2022. This is going to be with Gary Flowers, who I spoke about on last week's episode 306. In that episode, I was detailing on how Gary led us into the Speakeasy in Jackson Ward, and that was just absolutely phenomenal. And there is a video up all on that specific Speakeasy, walking in, how you went behind the hutch, and it's just absolutely amazing. So you could check that out at Cider Chat Ciderville on Instagram or at Cider Chat on TikTok. Do note that he's going to be mentioning Courtney, and that is Courtney Malley, who is the owner and founder of Blue Bee Cider in Richmond, Virginia. A must visit while you're there, and there will be an upcoming episode with Courtney on Cider Chat. So that was a tip of the glass to her, and also to the Tourism Bureau in the city, and of course the American Cider Association, which I think was just brilliant on their side to be supporting a tour like this for guests coming to a national conference. And I really hope that this becomes the norm at all future CiderCons, that there's always a historical tour of the city to provide us with an overview of the people who live there, their history, and their link to food and culture. For me, as someone who leads Totally Cider tours nationally and internationally, bringing people on tours to different regions of the world, it is a big part of the cider, drinking it, tasting it. But until you actually land your feet there and smell the earth, see the sights, see what influences people, you can't really get an idea of why that particular style and region has that taste profile in the cider. And so that's why I was absolutely thrilled to be able to take the Jackson Ward tour. And that's why I'm sharing it with you now, because this has provided me a different angle to see not only Richmond, Virginia, but Virginia overall. So let's head there now with Gary Flowers.
Glad you all are here this morning. My name is Gary Flowers. I own Walking the Ward with Gary Flowers, and I am excited to have you all here. I'm more excited about Black history. So a little bit about me and my company. 5th generation Richmond, Virginia native, 4th generation to live in historic Jackson Ward. I was a history major at the University of Virginia, then had further studies at Harvard at the Kennedy School where I could take classes, and I concentrated on Black history, particularly the Reconstruction period. And I'm so excited about history. I was that guy in elementary school who just loved history. And all of my friends are like, yeah, dates, and, a lot of dead people. But what I saw in history was what preceded where we are now, which influences what happens to whom, why, and where. Okay, can the church say amen to that? Amen. All right. So it marries my passion for history, particularly Black history, particularly Black Reconstruction history, with the fact that I lived in the neighborhood. So what you're going to get today is an amalgamation of my formal studies plus family anecdotes that will augment some of the historical points that I'm making. And it's so fortuitous. I want to thank Courtney and Liana for bringing this tour together on February the 1st. What we are learning today is American and world history. The reason it's called Black History is because Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the second African American to earn a PhD at Harvard University, was so angered that the contributions of African Americans were never included in history books. And he was like, we need Negro History Week. And so his colleagues at Harvard said, Carter, history is history. Why would you have to separate it? He said, well, I didn't separate it. You all separate it. So I'm working on inserting the missing pages of world history by way of the contributions of African Americans, not to predominate other forms of history or elements of history, but just for inclusion purposes. And so what we're going to find today are some of the hidden facts here in Richmond, Virginia. And as you may know from history, Virginia is the 7th richest state in the Union now. But in the early days of the American experiment, it was the wealthiest. It extended from where we are now in the ocean all the way to Cincinnati, Ohio. In fact, the reason West Virginia is West Virginia as a state is because it was Western Virginia. So there was so much of an influence in Richmond and in Virginia that 6 of the first 10 presidents from Virginia. So politically speaking, there was an effort to break up this Virginia monolith. But in the meantime, we set a lot of the patterns, good, bad, and ugly, for the empire known as America. So that's a little about me and how we got started. But I want to know from you, if you don't mind, just would you give me your name, from where you reside, and what you hope or pray to get out of the tour today?
So at this point, we were all going around on the bus explaining who we were and what we wanted to get out of it. And I saved this little clip with Maggie, who's a co-owner of Two Broad Cider out in San Luis Obispo, California. And I just love what she said because it actually encouraged me later that day to go to this very location. So check it out.
I'm Maggie. I'm from San Luis Obispo, California. I love history. I try to get a cemetery in on all my trips outside of California. So, just a weird fact about me, but I'm really excited about hearing your presentation.
Well, which one have you chosen? The cemeteries here, or have you?
I haven't chosen yet.
You got to go to Hollywood Cemetery.
Yes, ma'am.
You got to go to Hollywood, but you also have to go to Woodland.
Okay.
Because the dichotomy, okay, let's just stop right here on cemeteries. So cemeteries should be a place where you honor the dead and people are respected. Well, that was the case if you were white and if you were a Confederate and white. If you were African American, they put you outside of the city in a cemetery that was never kept. And so we have one cemetery, Woodland, where Mrs. Walker, Maggie Walker, is buried, and Arthur Ashe, and it's 65 acres. Only 10 acres have been re-cleared. There have been trees, I'm talking about a forest, has grown up through the graves of African Americans, because even in death, African Americans, beginning in this Commonwealth, which kind of transferred to the rest of the nation, were disrespected. So make sure you get to Woodland as well.
Okay.
All right.
Imagine for a moment, if you can, burying your family members and not being able to visit them because the location of the cemetery that was allocated to you is so far away. And then not being able to keep up the cemetery. It's just part of the psychological warfare, really, against the black people of Jackson Ward. I will have a video clip up on probably Instagram and TikTok showing what I saw at the Woodland Cemetery, and it was really really magnificent to be there. So let's continue on with this tour as he brings us into a little bit of the Richmond, or shall I say, Virginia way.
As an overview with the Commonwealth, 402 years ago, 20 Africans from Angola were captured in the Gulf of Mexico. that ship was taken over by the White Star ship. And then they were brought to what is now Hampton, Virginia, the mouth of Chesapeake Bay. It was called Point Comfort then. And these 20 Africans were then led off of the ship, and there was a little, let's say, cloudiness on their status. They were detained. So from a Black history perspective, we consider that enslaved from the beginning. But there were European nationals from England, Wales, Scotland, France, who were indentured servants. So they were to work a 7-year bid, if you will, and then be given land, and they could then earn wages from there on their own and make a profit. Well, English, anybody studied law? Okay, so that was my background before this. And English common law said under primogeniture that the inheritance went through the males, no females, and that the first son would inherit all of the land, the second son would become an Anglican bishop, the third son, well, he was SOL. So a lot of the founding fathers that came to Jamestown and set up the colony were the third sons. And they brought some of their friends who were incarcerated to help clear the land, who became indentured. Well, the Africans, they changed the common law for Africans. And there's a book, and I'll be throwing out books as we go along, In the Matter of Color, by A. Leon Higginbotham, a former federal judge from Philadelphia. A. Leon Higginbotham wrote a book, In the Matter of Color. And by 1662, that primogeniture common law was flipped over, only for Africans. So whites could still inherit from their father's status. Africans were now to inherit their status from their mother. And so if your mother is enslaved, you're enslaved. So that's how slavery started in America, in perpetuity, only for Africans. And then in 1677, a man by the name of Nathaniel Bacon organized the indentured nationals, the white guys, and the Africans, who were all upset because they thought they were getting the bad deal from the colonies. So they had what they called Bacon's Rebellion. And that was the first coming together of black and white. In fact, it was the beginning of white people. Because remember, I said they were nationals. They were from England. I'm from Wales. I'm from Scotland. I'm from France. That's how they identified themselves. But after Bacon's Rebellion, the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is now the General Assembly, said, you guys are white. And by being white, you have a higher status than the lowly Africans. And so many historians believe that's the beginning of whiteness, as we call it in America. So that's foundational to the American empire. Then you add on tobacco and the cash crops and the wealth that comes out of Virginia. That is how many of the good, the bad, and the ugly began here.
This historical perspective on the beginnings of slavery in America was riveting. And I'm going to just share this next piece with you, a little bit about the city of Richmond itself. There is one main road that goes through the center of Richmond, and it is called Broad Street. So let's go there next to hear a little bit about the dividing line, or what one could call the white line.
No blacks live on the southern side of Broad Street. That would hold true for centuries to come. And this becomes the demarcation line. So, I guess you have a question. Who lived on the northern side of Broad Street? I'm glad you asked the question. Anybody who was not considered white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So if you were German, Jewish, African American, Native American, Italian American, all on the northern side of Broad Street. And so we begin today's journey with knowing that if you are ethnic in any way, you're on the northern side of Broad Street. Now, what we're going to study more particularly today is historic Jackson Ward.
And so we did in this action-packed, fact-filled tour with Gary Flowers. You could check out Walking the Ward with Gary Flowers. There is a link in the show notes to this here episode, or just Google it and sign up if you can on the next tour when you are in Richmond, Virginia. Before we head to our next keynote speaker from CiderCon 2022, I'd like to, along with you out there in Ciderville, raise our glass to all the unsung heroes who help get an event like CiderCon off the ground and to be so entirely successful, at least from my vantage point. And I suspect if you attended, you would agree. It was just a lovely time, and there was a lot of cider FOMO going on out there. I know the folks who couldn't attend, it was difficult, right, not to be there. A lot of international guests were missing, and of course, folks throughout the U.S. who are part of the American Cider Association. So kudos to all the volunteers and to the core folks behind CiderCon 2022 for making that happen. And of course, that is the American Cider Association. Yes, CiderCon left me with hope. It was actually hope that drove me down to Richmond and got me back home. And it is hope that's going to keep me moving on through this year, 2022. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you have in hand, if you have hope, you kind of have everything. Which leads us to our next speaker. Diane Flint led the keynote address on the opening day of CiderCon 2022, and I'm going to be reading her bio that was on the CiderAssociation.org website. It reads, Diane began in 1997 when she founded Foggy Ridge Cider, the first licensed cidery in the South, by planting cider apples, including many southern varieties. From 2004 to 2018, Foggy Ridge Cider produced 5,300 gallons a year of orchard-focused ciders that were distributed across 15 states. Since its first production, Foggy Ridge Cider gained a national reputation for high-quality cider. Foggy Ridge was featured on CBS Sunday Morning Show and in publications including Gourmet, Imbibe, Saveur, Garden & Gun, Esquire, and Martha Stewart Living. Food & Wine magazine named Foggy Ridge a small batch superstar in 2010. Made in America awarded Foggy Ridge a 2012 American Treasures Award recognition for artisan producers. Foggy Ridge Cider received many Best of awards, including a top rating from the New York Times for its Serious Cider blend. Diane Flint herself was nominated for the James Beard Award for Outstanding Beverage Professionals in 2015 and 2016, and was a finalist for this award in 2017 and 2018. She speaks on cider, farming, and food culture in national and regional forums. And so it is with that I ask all of you out there in Ciderville to raise a glass and join this presentation with Diane Flint of Foggy Ridge Cider, based in Virginia.
I'm just honored to be here and honored to have the gift of your time and attention. As growers and makers, we all want our work to have meaning, and it means so much to be listened to. So thank you for that gift. And I hope that I have a few words for you today that will help our collective voices be heard. Before I get started on my short talk here, I want to recognize a really important person in the room you all should know, and that's Jocelyn Kozelka. Jocelyn was the cider maker at Foggy Ridge for our most formative years. She's a talented beverage professional, a dear friend, wonderful colleague. I know some of you will be attending her presentation and workshop, but get to know her. She is such a resource. I also, Virginia Cider has gotten a big old hurrah up here from several speakers. Thank you all for recognizing what the state has done. I particularly want to call out several cideries that were instrumental in forming the foundation of cider in the state. That were real pioneers, and I feel like compatriots with me, and that would be Bold Rock and my dear friends at Albemarle Cider Works and at Blue Bee. Feel like the work that you see in Virginia Cider is on the shoulders of those cideries. They are the pioneers. I remember Eleanor and I were just talking about this. I remember my first CiderCon meeting. I think we figured out it was in 2012, maybe. We were in a tiny little hotel room in Portland. There were less than 50 of us, and it was just incredible. I got to meet people I had only talked to on the phone. I felt like, I had colleagues at last. It was incredible. I learned so much about science and agriculture, what I consider the twin pillars of cider making. But most of all, when I got on that plane in Portland and flew back across the country, I felt like I had this wind of inspiration behind me. And I think that's the best of what events like this can give you. So I encourage you to take advantage of learning from your colleagues, the people at your table, as I did so many years ago. Learn from the experts, the researchers, the specialists, the experienced cider makers. Learn from them. But most of all, take away inspiration. And when you leave Richmond at the end of this great conference, go back to your work inspired to do better work and to make better cider. That's the gift of events like this. So as you can tell by my accent, we are in the South. But if you look at this map, we are only at the tip of the South. There is a lot more south of this South. In this room are cider makers from Georgia and North Carolina, from Kentucky and Tennessee. They're apple growers from states that you thought didn't know anything about cider and apples, like Alabama and South Carolina. Learn from them and learn about the exciting things going on throughout the South. And I'm going to talk about the whole region, and I hope paint a picture. My goal is to paint a picture of the rich cider and apple tradition that all of these Southern cider makers are building upon. It's a tradition that's rich with history, a complex history that has already been alluded to, but also a region that is rich with possibility for the future. And I hope by the end of my few words here, you will be inspired to look to my region for resources that you can take back to your home territory. But I also hope to inspire you to look at your own backyard with a new set of eyes. I asked Eleanor a couple of weeks ago what I should focus on in this talk, and she said, you should talk about the importance of storytelling. And I have to say I winced, because to me storytelling it's sort of like artisan or sustainable. It's lost its currency. And when I hear the word storytelling, I automatically think somebody is going to try to sell me something that I don't want. But the more I thought about what Eleanor told me, the more I believe that we should reclaim at least the meaning of storytelling. It is, and I'm going to start my talk today with history, because the stories are what make up history. So if you Google the first orchard in America, or you read any article written on cider in October, it will say that the first orchard in America was in Massachusetts, right? Well, 11 years before that orchard and 56 miles east of here in Jamestown, Thomas Gates planted a seedling orchard of apple and pear trees. The first orchard in the South, right? Well, many scholars believe that apples could have made it to the South from Nova Scotia and Maine in the 1500s and traveled down indigenous trade routes down the spine of the Appalachians, from the northern Appalachians, where my dear friend Autumn Stajcek makes cider, to the southern Appalachians, where I do. Another group of scholars believes that apples could have come from the South, from the Portuguese and Spanish in Florida, who brought citrus and peaches that quickly covered the South. After all, there is an apple that originated in the Florida Panhandle, and there are 8 that originated in Louisiana. Apples pop up all over the South when white farmers pushed into Native American territory in Alabama, and they came upon the old fort at Mobile, the old French fort. It was surrounded by an apple orchard. At the time of the Indian Removal Act in 1830, the largest indigenous population in the East was in Georgia. And when the Cherokee and Creeks were forcibly removed from land they had occupied for thousands of years, they left behind apple orchards, hundreds and hundreds of apple orchards. They were gifted horticulturalists. They cultivated apples. These were fenced orchards and selected varieties. And after they were evicted from their land and their farm, a Georgia nurseryman named Jarvis Van Buren went up into Cherokee land over several seasons and gathered scion wood from those orchards and introduced those apples into the nursery trade. I read a quote recently that the southern orchard is grafted on the trunk of a Cherokee apple tree, and there's a lot of truth in that. So back to Virginia. By 1622, we were planting grafted trees. We were getting scion wood from England and grafting trees here. So it wasn't just seedling orchards. And we had huge orchards. In Virginia's northern neck, a man named William Fitzhugh planted thousands of trees. And it's perhaps the most written about early southern orchard. It's almost 3,000 apple trees in sandy soil in a region of 10 feet elevation. And of course, when we say William Fitzhugh planted apple trees in the South, we say that in the same sense that we do when we say Thomas Jefferson made cider. It was the enslaved men and women who planted those thousands of trees among the stumps of virgin forest and fenced it with a locust fence. By the 1700s, seedling orchards covered the South. The South remained rural longer. We kept seedling orchards longer. Those seedling orchards grew in soil from sandy soil to Piedmont clay to mountain loam in a wide range of climates. That genetic diversity just spurted out there. And the southern seedling apple orchard is so diverse. And from that, like farmers everywhere, Southerners, black, white, and indigenous, selected apple varieties from among those seedling trees that suited their uses and needs, that gave them the flavor that they wanted. And of course, those uses include cider. I think the book title, which would come up next, yes, there it is. I think this title says it all. In the South, we didn't have towns like you had in the North. There weren't these communal apple presses that everybody took their apples to. We had to do it ourselves. Every home was a distillery and a cidery. And as Darlene Hayes wrote about recently in an article all of you should read, the work of cider making and distilling often fell to women and often fell to enslaved women. You know that when I talk about cider apples, the southern cider apples, the first words out of my mouth will be Hughes crabapple. I mean, it's an apple I planted back in 1997, which might have been the first commercial planting. And according to Dr. David Zakalik at Cornell, who did a recent survey on what cider-specific apples you use to make cider, Hughes crabapple is the only American variety on that list. That's just criminal. My mission today is to change that. There's so many other fruit, there's so many other apples that confer complex flavor, and many of them come from the South, and those are widely adapted and enduring fruit. I do love Hughes crabapple, though. It's one of my favorite cider apples. But it's not all the South has to offer when it comes to cider apples. I want you to take a look at this list of superb cider apples. This is a list just pulled from nursery catalogs. Over 150 years, these apples were sold in the South as cider apples. And I grow 4 or 5 of them. I love Parmar. I wish I had more of it. It's intensely flavored, just intensely sweet and very, very acidic. I'm planting at my advanced age. I am planting trees. I just want you to know you have no excuse. I'm planting Winter John. I have a row, and then this spring, Raul and Mary Godinez are going to help me top work some trees over to Winter John, a really exciting cider apple I want to experiment with. And if you come to the if you're lucky enough to come to the Southern Cider panel tomorrow, you'll hear about Southern cider makers who make cider with Keener Seedling, Kiner's Choice, Red and Black Limber Twig, and Madame Mesquite. Madame Mesquite is a really, to me, exciting apple from the coastal North Carolina. And Southern cider makers today believe that these apples actually confer many of the flavor attributes of the English bittersweets. So worth looking into. So how did all these trees get out in the world? Before the 20th century, the South had fabulous nurseries, and they were in the most unexpected places you would never think of as having anything to do with apples. Pomaria, South Carolina, outside of Columbia, Washington, Mississippi, Augusta, Georgia, Clarksville, Georgia. I told you apples grew all over the South. I wanted to take a look. Pomaria is a nursery that especially interested me as I was researching my book. They grew a lot of hyper-local apples from William Summers' neighbors in South Carolina. This list of apples from Pomaria, some of these are from Edisto Island, which is off the coast of Charleston. Cook's Red Winter was said to be superior to Red Limber Twig. They said that Hammond had better flavor than Newtown Pippin. These are well-adapted apples to coastal and central South Carolina. In Augusta, Georgia, a Belgian immigrant with a triple barrel name, Jules Prosper Alphonse Berkmans, operated what is probably the best-known nursery in the South called Fruitlands. His nursery and Pomaria both listed at one time over 400 apple varieties on their lists. And Fruitlands persisted into the 20th century, and it exists today. Berkman's home is the clubhouse of the Augusta National Golf Course, and the golf course is on the grounds of the old nursery. That home was built with enslaved labor before Berkman's moved into it. When you think of the South, you don't think of the Deep South as having apples. Here's a list of apples from southern nurseries in Mississippi, grown in Alabama, Mississippi, South Georgia. Shell of Alabama is one apple that has very low chill days and is grown now in Africa. So we also have in the South a great wild apple diversity. Many of you are familiar with Gary Nabhan's work. He's an ethnobotanist and MacArthur Grant winner. He has written that the southern Appalachians have the greatest remaining apple diversity in America. So let me just sum it up. We've got a lot of wild apples today. We had seedling orchards all over the South for hundreds of years. We have close to 2,000 apples that originated in the South and are widely adapted to hot, humid growing conditions. These apples deserve another look. They deserve your hard look, and I encourage you to learn about them and plant them. Okay, so how are you going to do that? You've got a lot of people in the room to talk to about that. I would point out a few here. Jeff Wheeler, I believe, is here from the University of Kentucky. He's doing some research on cider apples. Josh Feuder is sitting right over there. He is one of the originators of the Georgia Heritage Apple Orchard, planted over 130 apples long grown in Georgia and originating in Georgia. Horn Creek Farm is the repository of Lee Calhoun's collection of over 400 southern apple varieties in Pinnacle, North Carolina. Here today you've got Virginia Tech resources, you've got that Southern Cider panel tomorrow, and you have apple growers and cider makers all over the South, some of whom use these apples. So I asked Michelle what I should talk about, and she said I should talk a little bit about the Foggy Ridge story, and I have just a few words on that because I think it connects to Southern fruit. It also connects to this industry which I care so much about. Foggy Ridge Cider was always all about the flavor of fruit from a place. And my business model, such as it was, reflected the inclinations of the founder, of me. Foggy Ridge, as you can see from the map, is way over in Southwest Virginia, 5 hours from Richmond. Yes, Virginia is a large state. And I was never interested in running a restaurant. I didn't want to host weddings, didn't want to get big, didn't want to spend all my day on a computer. Really didn't particularly want bands and food trucks on my farm every weekend. I wanted to grow exceptional cider fruit, and I wanted me and my team to make the very best cider we could from that fruit. I wanted to express a place through fruit. I also wanted the best sommeliers in the country to write about my cider. I wanted them to put it in their restaurants and shops. I wanted the wine writers to think about cider. I wanted Foggy Ridge and cider to be at the table of American beverages, to be thought about, to be talked about, to have meaning, and to be listened to. The way I attempted to do that was simply to tell my story again and again and again and again, an authentic story about place and fruit. I bet not many of you have attended a Southern Baptist church service. If you have, you know there's something at the end of the service called an altar call. That's where you come down to the front and you profess your faith. I am not going to ask you to come down to the front because of COVID, but I am going to ask you in the next few minutes before I wrap up to think about what you put faith in. I talked to Greg Pack a couple of weeks ago, and he reminded me that 10 years ago when he was applying for cider grants, people were saying, oh, I don't know if I should give you money. You know, this cider thing, it's going to be like a 10-year wine cooler. I don't know if it's worth it. He said now he doesn't have any trouble. He doesn't get that anymore. He doesn't hear about cider being a flash in the pan. We have successful national brands to be proud of. We have solid, good quality regional cider brands to be proud of. We have many people making cider that's on the radar of national publications. But I still think we are only teetering on the edge of success. Not enough people drink cider. Not enough people are willing to pay for cider that's made with the fruit that will confer the most complex flavor. Not enough people are willing to pay for cider in a way that orchardists can make a living growing fruit for that cider, or get excited about planting a whole lot more of that fruit. The American Cider Association has had courageous conversations around race and gender and privilege and the history of our beverage. I think we can do the same around fruit and around what we need to do and do better to have a bigger seat and a louder voice. When I started Foggy Ridge, I wanted cider to be listened to. I wanted it to be a meaningful part of the beverage discussion because I think we have a lot to offer. We are a big tent organization, and that's a good thing. But to have that meaningful multi-generation seat at the table, more of you need to focus your story on fruit. More of you need to either grow apples or work closely with the orchardist in the room and in your regions to plant the kind of apples that will cause discussion, that will confer great flavor, and that will be part of your story. as Eleanor recently said in her letter to you, she said our future as an industry is strengthened when we link cider with apples. And I totally agree with her. Our ingredient grows on trees. If we try to compete on price with beverages that are made with row crops and water, we are not doing ourselves a good service. We need authentic stories from all of you, and you have them. I know many of you, and you have those stories. I encourage you to talk about them, to link them to your beverage, and to really focus on fruit. I think that's our path forward. When I started Foggy Ridge Cider back in 1997, I wanted cider's voice in the room. I believe we have a great deal to add, and I believe it's a complex ad. Let's don't flatten that story. Let's make it rich and deep and complex. I hope my tales about nurseries and apples and regions and soils and people and cider in the South inspires you to uncover those same stories in your regions. Those are meaningful things to talk about. So I gave you a history lesson because it's the story in history that gives us power. I look forward to hearing your conversations in the future. You've got 2 great days ahead of you. Go out there and learn something to make you better. Thank you.
Take away inspiration. That is what Diane Flint is all about. She's really inspiring, isn't she? And early on, she mentioned a woman by the name of Eleanor while she was speaking. Well, that was actually Eleanor Leger, who just was reelected as a president for the American Cider Association, and she founded Eden Specialty Ciders in Vermont. We love Eleanor. She's awesome, a great supporter of Cider Chat. And also Michelle, and that is Michelle McGrath, the executive director of the American Cider Association. Lots of food for thought there, and most definitely calling out makers to try their hand in growing southern apples. I just love the regionality and the ownership that makers have for each region, not only in the U.S., but in the world. It just feels so encouraging. I mean, that kind of like home feeling and home pride, that's what moves makers forward. It shouldn't seem like, oh, one is better than the other, even though they'll say that. Why not? I know what I feel about New England. But at the same time, it pushes us all to keep on reaching out and understanding what makes that other area so very special to those makers there. There's got to be something, and that search for it is what Cider Chat and what you, Ciderville, I know we're all about. So with a bit of luck and a whole lot of hope, we're going to continue forward with more phenomenal episodes on this here podcast. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
We like cider. We like palms. We love orchards and having fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes, there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider.
Oh, yes, we do.
We like palms.
Oh, yes, we do.
We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There's a reason why we do it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
There is a reason why we drink it like this.
Ba-da-da-dum.
Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet.
Oh, yeah.
We like cider.
Ba-da-da-dum.
We like palms.
Oh, yes, we do.
We like orchards, having some fun.
Yeehaw!